She boarded the plane with confidence, dressed sharp, and holding a valid first-class ticket. But just as she settled into her seat, something shocking happened. The pilot, without a word of explanation, stormed down the aisle, snatched her ticket, and tore it in half. Passengers gasped. Phones came out, but no one intervened. Why was she singled out? What was the real reason behind this public humiliation? What the world would soon learn about her identity would leave them stunned, and the airline scrambling to save face.
If you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss a moment that matters.
Danielle Monroe wasn't just any passenger. She was the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room, elegant, poised, and effortlessly confident. At 36, she had built an empire from scratch. Her tech startup, launched in her college dorm, had recently gone public. But today wasn't about business. It was her first real vacation in nearly 3 years. A flight from Atlanta to San Francisco, a seat in 1A, and, for once, time to breathe. She arrived early at the airport, breezed through security, and smiled politely at the gate agent as she handed over her first-class boarding pass. No issues, no questions, just a nod and a "have a great flight." Everything was seamless until she stepped into the cabin. As she settled into her leather seat, the eyes came, the sideways glances, the raised brows. She could feel it, the question unspoken but heavy in the air. Does she really belong here? She'd grown used to it, being the only black woman in VIP lounges, the only one in boardrooms, the only one in first class. Danielle adjusted her seatbelt, pulled out her book, and tried to relax. She didn't notice the commotion at first. A man in uniform talking to the flight attendants. Then, footsteps, heavy, deliberate, making their way down the aisle. It was the pilot. He didn't smile. He didn't introduce himself. He just stood in front of her seat, looked her dead in the eyes, and reached for her ticket. That's when everything began to unravel. Danielle looked up, startled, as the pilot reached into her personal space. With 2 fingers, he plucked the boarding pass from the armrest tray. His expression was unreadable, blank, almost cold. Without a word, he examined the ticket, flipped it once, then again before slowly tearing it in half. The sound of the paper ripping seemed louder than the ambient cabin noise. Conversations halted. Heads turned. A man in 2B put down his tablet. A flight attendant near the galley froze mid-step. Danielle's heart pounded. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice controlled but tight. The pilot didn't answer. Instead, he handed the torn pieces to the nearest flight attendant. "She's not cleared for this seat," he muttered, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Escort her back to coach." Danielle blinked. She had triple-checked everything, her boarding group, seat assignment, digital confirmation. This wasn't a mistake. "I believe there's been an error," she said firmly, showing her phone with the digital version of the same ticket. "I booked this seat 2 months ago. First class. Seat 1A. The flight attendant shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, the pilot is responsible for passenger safety and cabin integrity. If he's asking," Danielle cut her off. "I'm asking why." But she already knew. There was no technical issue, no overbooking, no emergency. It was the same old story playing out in a new setting. She'd lived it in board meetings, in boutique stores, in the elevator of her own office building. The assumption, the judgment, the belief that she didn't belong. A murmur rippled through the cabin. A couple in 3C whispered to each other, visibly uncomfortable. Someone in the back took out a phone and began recording. "I paid for this seat," Danielle repeated, louder this time. "And I'm not moving." The pilot's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, either return to your assigned seat in coach or exit the aircraft." Now the whispers turned into light gasps. Exit the aircraft? Before takeoff? For what reason? Danielle could feel the eyes on her, but she didn't flinch. She had worked too hard, fought too many battles to shrink now. She calmly turned to the passengers around her and said, "Just so we're clear, this is happening because I'm black." The words hung in the air like smoke. Heavy. Uncomfortable. True. And then someone in 2B spoke up. A white businessman in a navy blazer. This is outrageous. She's got the right seat. I saw her board. Another voice, a woman in 4A. This is unacceptable. You can't do this. But the pilot didn't back down. He gave the crew a curt nod and stepped back. Danielle's hands clenched on her lap. She didn't know what would happen next. But what she did know, this wasn't going to end the way they expected. The cabin had fallen into a heavy, breathless silence. One where every eye watched, every ear listened, and every phone camera silently captured history unfolding. The flight attendant, clearly shaken, stepped forward again. "Ma'am, please," she whispered, almost pleading now, torn between duty and conscience. But Danielle didn't move. Instead, she stood up, not to back away but to face them. "My name is Danielle Reeves," she said clearly, her voice calm, unwavering. "I'm the chief operating officer of Ascend Air, the parent company of this airline. This flight, this crew, this entire operation technically reports to me." The pilot froze mid-step, his mouth parting ever so slightly. You could almost hear the collective inhale from the passengers. Danielle slowly reached into her designer handbag and retrieved a leather ID case. She opened it with precision and held it up, displaying both her executive clearance badge and her company credentials. The name on the card matched her words, Danielle Reeves, COO, Ascend Air Holdings. The air shifted. No one blinked. The pilot's face lost all color as he leaned in to look, then stepped back, visibly rattled. The flight attendants exchanged glances, unsure whether to follow orders or protect their jobs. Danielle wasn't finished. "This is not about a seat. It's not about a boarding pass. It's about bias, power, and the assumption that someone who looks like me couldn't possibly belong here," she said, her tone rising just enough to carry across the cabin. "Let me be clear. I do belong. And I'm not the one who'll be exiting this flight." A man from the back yelled, "She's right," and passengers began nodding, murmuring in agreement. The pilot, sweating now, tried to recover. I wasn't aware of your position, ma'am." Danielle stared him down. "That's exactly the problem." The airline removed the pilot before takeoff. Danielle completed the flight, in her seat, in silence, with dignity. Days later, the airline issued a public apology, and Danielle launched a company-wide inclusion initiative, starting with that very crew. But for Danielle, it wasn't about revenge. It was about forcing the industry to see what it had ignored for too long. Because she didn't just hold a ticket to first class. She held the power to change what belonging really means. And now, no one would ever forget her name. Hit subscribe stories for change for more interesting stories.